During his brief stay, my drunk brother-in-law completely dominated our lives. Even after I eventually spoke out, my husband still preferred his brother over me. To Jimmy, 35 years my junior, I am Barbara, and we have been married for 4 years. While he was a senior in college, I was a sophomore, and we met. I was captivated by his gentle and caring demeanor right away. We were married in a tiny ceremony, with only close relatives and friends present after dating for 5 years. Our relationship has always been cordial, Jimmy and I. Brent, Jimmy's younger brother, is 29 years old, and I need to fill you in on their family dynamics so you can appreciate the recent problems we've been having. At the ages of 18 and 12, respectively, Jimmy and Brent lost both of their parents in a vehicle accident. They were both devastated, but Brent, who was so young, took a particularly hard hit. Since he was the older brother, Jimmy was tasked with rearing Brent. He put his personal aspirations on hold, working 2 or more jobs to make ends meet, while he attempted to complete his degree. Although this event strengthened the brotherly relationship, it also set up a dysfunctional dynamic in which Jimmy takes Brent's welfare for granted, neglecting his own needs in the process. Finally, we are married. Brent has never been good at being on his own and taking charge. He worked odd jobs throughout his 20s before finally settling into a steady profession. No matter what, Jimmy was there to help Brent out financially or put him in touch with people who could open doors for him. The number of times Jimmy has loaned Brent money and Brent has never returned the favor is beyond my comprehension. I made an effort to be supportive, even if I had reservations about this pattern. I aspired to be an excellent sister-in-law because I understood the significance of Brent to Jimmy. However, I have repeatedly witnessed Brent taking advantage of Jimmy's charity throughout the years. This whole mess began around 6 months ago when Brent's wife Lisa started seeing someone else. The breakup was acrimonious and unpleasant, and they had only been married for 2 years. Brent lost his work as an accountant as a result of his severe melancholy, heavy drinking, and frequent absences and blunders. Initially, I felt sorry for them. I could tell that Brent was having a hard time adjusting to the divorce. I made it a point to have dinner with Jimmy on a frequent basis, listen to him cry about Lisa, and offer words of encouragement to get help, whether that's therapy or a support group. Months passed, and it was obvious that Brent still hadn't done anything to change his circumstances. Brent arrived at our doorway one late night last month, visibly inebriated and visibly distressed. He asked us to let him stay with us temporarily until he was able to pay his rent again, after he informed us he was in over his head. Jimmy didn't even look in my direction before saying yes. In spite of my anger and surprise at Jimmy's decision-making process, I repressed my words for the time being. I attempted to have a conversation with Jimmy later that night, while Brent was sound asleep on our couch, in order to establish some ground rules and a schedule for his stay. In response to my worries, Jimmy dismissed them, stating that our presence was crucial during Brent's crisis. Brent has been staying with us for more than a month now, and I reluctantly agreed to let him stay because I thought it would only be for a few weeks, while Brent remains put, not even making an effort to look for work. He never gets out of bed till midday, makes a mess everywhere he goes, consumes our food without helping, and passes much of his time in front of the TV or video games. Having Brent around the house all day is really getting in the way of my work as a graphic designer who works from home. I've never seen him apply for a job, but he uses my office while I'm not there, claims he needs the space to seek for work, and is quite noisy and interruptive. Brent never does anything when I try to talk to him about picking up after himself or finding work instead. He always has an excuse or an empty promise. My brother Jimmy jumps to defend him when I bring it up with him, telling me that we must be patient, because Brent is going through a tough period. However, it seems like we're giving Brent carte blanche to be careless and lazy right now. Last week it hit rock bottom. I politely requested Brent to refrain from making any noise and to leave the office for a couple of hours because I had a crucial video conference appointment with a client. His agreement was unanimous. He seemed inebriated as he stormed into my office midway through my call and began fumbling through my desk drawers, saying something about needing a pen. I felt ashamed and had to cut off my call suddenly. Brent became defensive and accused me of being too sensitive and insensitive when I challenged him about his actions. He needed to start looking for a home of his own, since his conduct was intolerable, and I lost my patience and told him so, as expected. Brent blasted out of the home and promptly contacted Jimmy to air his grievances about my cruel behavior. Upon returning home that night, Jimmy did not support me but rather accused me of being callous and neglecting my family during their most vulnerable moments. As an only child, he claimed I lack empathy, as I have no idea what it's like to share a home with multiple siblings. This led to a major altercation between us. I detailed how Brent has been using us and interfering with our life in every manner imaginable. When my own folks were becoming cranky, Jimmy reacted by telling me about all the times his family had welcomed me for the holidays. There has always been tension in my relationship with them. He mentioned that during last year's week-long stay with us, my college pals, he never once grumbled. I thought Jimmy was really missing the mark when she was in town. There is a world of difference between having someone stay for a week and inviting them to stay permanently. This is not how I can live my life, I told Jimmy, but I love him anyhow. Having Brent around all the time has made our home feel less like our own. I already mentioned that Brent had to vacate the premises by the month's end. With this ultimatum, Jimmy's anger only grew. By expelling Brent, he claimed I would be irrevocably harming their connection and attempting to drive a wedge between him and his brother. He made a beeline for the door and didn't return until much later that evening. Apart from restating his refusal to expel Brent, he has not communicated with me since then. This is driving me crazy. Knowing that Brent is having a hard time makes me conflicted, since I also think we've helped him enough, and he's abusing our generosity. I prefer to keep my distance from my brothers, but I also don't want to play the victim at home. Would you call me a sexist if I wanted to get rid of my brother-in-law? Given this circumstance, what am I to do? First update: I appreciate everyone's thoughts and suggestions. The encouragement and new points of view you've provided are greatly appreciated. I've been given a lot of food for thought by it. Your feedback encouraged me to give it another go at talking to Jimmy rationally and calmly about the matter. After making sure Brent was gone for the day, I waited until we were both off work. In the hopes that the familiar setting would bring back fond memories of our first date, I prepared Jimmy's favorite breakfast and proposed a picnic in the park. While we were at the park, I quietly went over how difficult and annoying Brent's presence had been. How has his conduct impacted my job and our family life? I gave concrete examples. While I understand Brent's plight, I don't believe we're doing him any favors by allowing him to freeload forever, as I made clear. Additionally, I shared my deepest feelings of hurt caused by Jimmy's denial of my worries and the accusation that I lack understanding of sibling relationships. Despite my own troubled family background, I wanted him to know how supportive I had been of his relationship with Brent throughout the years. Jimmy surprised me by paying attention this time. His own mixed emotions started to surface as we spoke. Although he is aware that Brent has been exploiting the situation, he is unable to break free from his feelings of remorse and duty, he confessed. He admitted that Brent always brings up his parents' death and Jimmy's vow to take care of him whenever he attempts to bring up the subject of getting a job or moving out. In sharing his fear of losing Brent, his only remaining blood relative, Jimmy sobbed uncontrollably. He's afraid that Brent might get more drunker or do something crazy if he presses him too much. Jimmy let it slip that Brent's nebulous remarks about not wanting to continue have been a major source of concern for him. The news stunned me. I was completely unaware that Brent had been using Jimmy's emotions for his own gain. Because of it, I was able to view the brother's plight with fresh empathy. Jimmy and I concluded after a lengthy and emotionally taxing discussion that we must find a solution to Brent's situation other than having him live with us permanently. I think it would be best if Brent had another 2 months to look for work and a place to live on his own. Meanwhile, we're going to establish some strict ground rules. Groceries and household bills are Brent's responsibility. Everybody needs to pitch in around the house. He needs to prove to us that he is actively seeking employment every single day. There will be no more imbibing at home. He should refrain from visiting my office during my work hours. With these goals and the 2-month time frame in mind, Jimmy consented to have an honest conversation with Brent. He acknowledged that his brother requires expert assistance, which we are unable to give, and vowed to investigate options for Brent's addiction treatment and therapy. Following our discussion, I had a cautious sense of optimism. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Jimmy and I appeared to have similar views, and I held out hope that we could collaborate to rectify the issue. But the following day, something completely out of the ordinary happened. Brent was in the living room talking on the phone when I was in my office working. He was yelling at someone, maybe a friend, about how Jimmy and I were being unfair for ejecting him from the house. Among his many derogatory comments was the accusation that I had incited Jimmy to betray him. His statement, "I know how to handle Jimmy," was the most upsetting aspect. My plan is to bring up his parents' names, and maybe even threaten to do something foolish in the hopes that he'll reconsider. As usual, he does. I was enraged. In a flash, the empathy I'd felt the day before vanished. My anger at what I had heard caused me to go out of my office and confront Brent. Upon realizing I had overheard him, he reacted angrily and attempted to retract his statement, saying I had misunderstood, and dispute ensued between us. Brent stated that I was attempting to mediate between his brother and himself, and that I was also eavesdropping on them. I lost it, and accused him of being a manipulative, spoiled brat, who should just grow up and stop micromanaging everyone else's problems. Concerning his emotional blackmail of Jimmy, I informed him that I was aware of it. It had to end right now. A flush of wrath spread across Brent's face. I was attempting to kidnap his brother, he said angrily, and he would make sure Jimmy knew what a heartless jerk I was. I would never comprehend what he and Jimmy had gone through, he added, slamming the door behind him. He then stormed out of the house. A combination of wrath and adrenaline made me tremble. At work, I attempted to reach Jimmy, but he was unresponsive. I texted him, pleading for him to return home immediately, so we could have a conversation. When Jimmy returned home a few hours later, I was still in a foul mood and Brent was not there. I thought Jimmy would share my rage at Brent's trickery when I told him what had transpired. Unexpectedly, Jimmy sided with Brent, much to my disappointment. He told me I was wrong to confront Brent in that way, that I must have misheard Brent, and that even if he had said those things, he likely didn't intend them. He claimed that I had instigated Brent's anger and exacerbated the issue. Another major altercation ensued. After our conversation the day before, I still couldn't believe Jimmy was siding with Brent, with the excuse that he was concerned about his brother's mental health. Jimmy eventually left to locate Brent. Jimmy has yet to return home, even though that was yesterday. When I phone or text him, he does not respond. I am completely clueless as to his and Brent's whereabouts and the future of the situation. This is driving me crazy. Regardless of my actions, I always seem to be the antagonist. A part of me wishes I could just get away from this toxic scenario for a bit. On the other hand, I would rather not leave my house or allow Brent to put distance between Jimmy and me. After this, I am at a loss as to what to do. If you have any suggestions for dealing with this disaster, please let me know. The second update is that in the 7 days since I last wrote, the situation has only grown more difficult and stressful. They spent a couple of nights in a hotel after Jimmy departed to locate Brent. On day 3, Jimmy told me they were returning home and that we needed to talk. I was ready for what I thought would be a challenging discussion. It startled me to see how frail and distraught the brothers appeared when they arrived. It came out that they had spent those days talking non-stop about Brent's problems, their relationship, and their parents' deaths. An ultimatum was issued after Jimmy had at last addressed Brent on his deceptive conduct. With an air of imminent doom, the three of us took our seats in our living room. First, Jimmy expressed regret for ignoring my worries and abruptly departing. He came clean about his denial of Brent's problems and how much of a burden they were on our marriage. Brent then cautiously raised his voice to speak. After admitting he had been abusing our generosity, he apologized for his behavior. He admitted to utilizing emotional manipulation to evade dealing with his issues, which include melancholy and alcoholism, which he has been battling since his divorce. What ensued was a lengthy, passionate, and occasionally furious discussion. Limits, expectations, and the necessity of change were all topics of our conversation. Ultimately, we were able to reach a consensus. Within 2 weeks, with Jimmy's assistance, Brent would be moving out to a smaller flat. He decided to get help for his alcoholism by enrolling in an outpatient program. He planned to begin therapy in order to address his codependency and sadness. To fix our communication issues and reestablish trust, Jimmy and I would go to couples therapy. We asked that Brent accept our limits and restrict family dinners to once a week. On one hand, I was weary and suspicious, while on the other, I was cautiously optimistic about this proposal. I knew my relationship with Jimmy would take a long time to recover from the recent storm, and I was prepared to face the challenge. As we assisted Brent with finding an apartment and packing, the following 2 weeks were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Things became heated at times, especially when Brent said he felt booted out, but Jimmy was unyielding in his support of the strategy we had all agreed upon. About a week has passed since Brent moved into his new apartment. His rehabilitation program has begun, and he appears to be fully committed to it thus far. Our first couples therapy session was challenging yet fruitful for Jimmy and myself. We are gaining the ability to communicate more effectively and tackle the fundamental problems that caused this to happen. But I still have problems trusting people and dealing with residual anger. I am beginning to doubt Jimmy's dedication to our relationship, and fear that he may revert to putting Brent ahead of our marriage. It's challenging, but I'm attempting to be patient and give him an opportunity to demonstrate his worth. A couple of things have happened that are worrying. Brent has harassed Jimmy with late-night phone calls, pretending to be in a crisis, on 2 occasions now. Jimmy left me feeling abandoned and worried both times when he hurried over to Brent's flat. Jimmy became combative when I voiced my worries, claiming he can't turn a blind eye to his brother's problems. In spite of my empathy for the need to lend a hand to loved ones, I believe it is important to set some firm limits. I fear that Jimmy lacks the strength to withstand Brent's relapse into previous methods of manipulation. In a more optimistic light, I have been working on re-establishing my personal identity and autonomy. Amidst all the mayhem of the last several months, I've been getting back in touch with friends and enrolling in an online graphic design course to hone my craft. After all this familial strife, it's nice to be able to take back some of my life and focus on me again. To get down to basics and spend quality time together, Jimmy and I are thinking about organizing a weekend retreat. I'm worried about leaving Brent alone for a whole weekend, but I'm hoping it will be a good step. Trying to maintain a healthy marriage and meet my own needs while simultaneously supporting Jimmy in his interactions with his brother is a balancing act that I'm navigating day by day. Keeping my balance is a constant challenge, and I question whether I'm making the correct decisions. I would highly appreciate any guidance on how to handle this intricate family dynamic while preserving my marriage. I want this to succeed, but I'm afraid I'll be harmed again if things don't get better. Third update. My last post was about a month ago, and I'm here to fill you in on the most recent events in our never-ending family drama. It had been 5 weeks since Brent moved into his own apartment. There have been some good adjustments, but the transition hasn't been smooth. According to Jimmy, he hasn't touched alcohol in 3 weeks, and has been consistently attending his rehabilitation program. To address his melancholy and codependency, he has also been visiting a therapist twice a week. Jimmy and I have maintained our commitment to our couple's therapy. I've learned a lot, but it hasn't been easy. Beyond the Brent scenario, we have discovered some underlying problems in our relationship. Jimmy has a tendency to disregard my sentiments and viewpoints on occasion. This tendency stems from his desire to play the role of protector and fixer, which he developed as a result of his upbringing by Brent and his own parents' deaths. It has been challenging for me to express my needs because of my insecurity about being vulnerable, which stems from my troubled relationship with my own family. Our ability to communicate and see things from each other's points of view is gradually improving. It's still early days, but I think we're heading in the correct way. Our planned weekend retreat was fantastic, but it was also very stressful. Enjoying one another's company without the continual tension of the preceding few months, we had some wonderful moments of reconnecting. But Brent phoned Jimmy many times while we were on the road, each time claiming Jimmy could fix a small problem that had arisen. Even though Jimmy made an effort to establish limits, I could see that he was emotionally torn every time his phone called. Fortunately, I have devoted myself fully to my career and self-improvement. Some fascinating new project opportunities have arisen as a result of the online course I'm enrolled in. My new hobby of helping at an animal shelter has brought me so much happiness and helped me to relax. We are still having dinner together as a family once a week. Things are getting better, but they're still rather tight. As a significant improvement, Brent has begun to question me about my job and appears to be trying to have more upbeat talks overall. Still, obstacles have cropped up. Brent, who had been working part-time at a nearby supermarket, was let go last week. He argued his employer's lack of compassion during his rehabilitation was to blame. However, Jimmy discovered after the fact that Brent had a history of chronic shift tardiness. Because of this, Jimmy and I got into another fight about how much help we should provide Brent. Although I make an effort to be tolerant and patient, there are moments when I feel resentful. At times I question if this is the trajectory our lives will take, preoccupied with avoiding potential problems and always on the lookout for Brent's next move. Our future plans were extensively discussed last night by Jimmy and me. It is our mutual goal to strengthen our marriage. On the other hand, we are cognizant of the fact that Brent's problems are likely to persist for some time. We're attempting to strike a balance between being there for one another as family and setting appropriate limits. A new set of guidelines has been settled upon. In times of trouble, Jimmy will not immediately go to Brent's flat. He will instead try to persuade Brent to put into practice the coping mechanisms he is receiving treatment for. On date nights, we will refrain from discussing Brent in order to strengthen our bond. Jimmy makes biased decisions, therefore I'll be more active in conversations on how to help Brent. Though I approach these improvements with a cautious optimism, I am well aware that we still have a ways to go. Even though I feel deeply about Jimmy and want to be there for him, I must prioritize meeting my own needs and taking care of myself. My goal going forward is to live life to the fullest, day by day. Every day isn't perfect. I'm learning to appreciate the little wins, like when Brent and I are able to have a civil conversation at family dinner, or when Jimmy and I are able to resolve our differences without resorting to an argument about his brother. I have no idea what is ahead for us. However, I will not back down from my efforts to strengthen our marriage. Meanwhile, I'm attempting to focus on my profession and personal hobbies in order to create a life for myself apart from this familial drama. For everyone's encouragement along the way, I am eternally grateful. Your insights and counsel have been priceless. I will provide another update in the event that our position undergoes any substantial adjustments.